All right, now, let's do some fan questions.
Good day, sir. Who is smarter, John Jones or Tito Ortiz?
Oh, who's smarter? See, I like the way you did that. Who's smarter between John Jones and Tito Ortiz? Career-wise, Tito. Career-wise, Tito would have him beat. Tito did understand the concept of having what's called an angle. Whatever that angle is, whatever your dispute or your beef with your opponent is, he was good at exposing it. He'd find what it was, and he was good at exposing it, getting a reaction from his opponent. John has put himself in a very unique spot where he's a very rare talent. But there's nobody to challenge him perception-wise. I don't want to hear about the skills and the reach and the undefeated record and all these different things. I'm talking about perception-wise. And it would be very helpful for John if he would elevate somebody. But his ego doesn't allow him. It's just he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand how to come out and say, well, this guy could be a threat to me. I'll give you an example. Khabib just did this with Tony Ferguson. Now, Ferguson versus Khabib works and that fight sells. I fully understand that. But the concept is the same here. Khabib came out and said, I have been unmotivated to train until now because I have such a worthy opponent in Tony standing across from me. Well, that helps. That doesn't hurt Khabib to acknowledge that he's working extra hard and acknowledge that he sees the positives in Tony. That doesn't hurt Khabib, but it does elevate Tony. Just to offer a recent example. And I don't think that John does a great job of looking at the landscape and seeing whoever I'm in there with, whatever I'm going to try to do to them within the unified rules, they're still my partner. I'm in business with that guy for one night only, but I'm looking for a good partner.
Hey, Chael, big fan from London. Quick question. Nick Diaz is calling out Jorge Masvidal a lot at the moment, and let's fast forward into the future and say that fight happens and Nick gets the win over him. Do you think that sets up a Nick Diaz versus Conor McGregor fight for the BMF title? And if so, what are your thoughts on that fight?
Well, I'll tell you this. I think it definitely sets up some storylines within that weight class. I think you've got some musical chairs going on there. And to make believe that if Nick Diaz fought Masvidal sets up a McGregor versus Nick Diaz, I think that we're taking some liberties there. First off, I think that implies that Conor's getting past Cowboy, and it would imply that Nick is getting past Masvidal, and I mean, not for nothing. Them boys got to go figure that out on their own, but it does certainly set up the storylines, and any way you want to do that parody, I think, could be very exciting. Now, I would share this with you. As far as the BMF title goes, and would Nick, which is what you asked, would Nick put that up against Conor? That would imply that George is putting that up against Nick. And not for nothing, but if we're just a couple of guys talking, that is very relevant because supposedly the BMF title was a one-night only thing and it stops. I don't know that it's going to have a lineage and move forward. Now, I think your match still works. I'm not sure that Conor has to beat Cowboy for us to all want to see Conor again. I'm not sure that Nick has to beat George for us to want to see Nick and Conor get in there. But I do think that we're starting to see some real fun within that division, and I'm not sure it's going to stop. I mean, guys are moving around a little bit. Kevin Lee was just a 170-pounder. Now he's back at 155. Justin Gaethje's looking for something to do at 155, but not quite getting the fights he wants. Who knows if he's going to go to 170? And I'm starting a rumor there, but what I'm just suggesting for you is 155 and 170, that's pretty close. I mean, that's not a huge 15 pounds, that's not huge separation. Non-championship match, 14 pounds, that's not huge separation. Evident of the fact that we are starting to see guys swing and bounce and jump up and go back down, and the guys that are going up are having very good success there. So let's see how 170 pounds plays out over the year. But I do think there is something to be said for this Nick Diaz business. And for some reason, and I'm not predicting for you, that Nick and Masvidal is an agreed upon fight. I'm not predicting that. But we have been very clear over here that when two athletes start going at one another in the media and all of a sudden simultaneously and coincidentally both athletes go silent in the media, it's because the fight is made. I don't think Masvidal and Nick is made. But they are following along in the same footsteps as guys that have a date with each other.
So I got a question that Google doesn't seem to understand what I'm asking. As far as weight cutting goes, why does every fighter have some sort of weight cutting process for every single fight they're in? Why don't they just fight at the weight class that's closest to what they're walking around at? I don't understand why there's always such a weight cutting process involved, whether it's Darren Till or Conor McGregor, or everybody seems to walk around 20 pounds heavier than they need to. So why don't they just go to the weight class that's closest to what they walk around at? Why is there always a weight cutting process?
Ding, ding, ding. I mean, boom, you nailed it right there. And largely, this is an American phenomenon. Now, I realize when you bring up Darren Till and Conor McGregor, these guys are not, but I'm telling you, Americans are the ones that believe in cutting weight, whether that's in the high schools for wrestling and the colleges for wrestling, the world and Olympic teams. When you go abroad, Eastern Bloc, Russian nations, you will not see these guys cutting weight. They're 3-4 pounds over what they weigh. They'll get up in the morning, go for a nice jog, they'll go catch a little work, roll around, boom, take their clothes off and go and hit the scale. Some of these guys, and now we are seeing it fight, but I mean, they're cutting huge amounts of weight. So you don't see this in boxing either. The Canelos of the world and the Triple Gs of the world, these guys aren't going and pulling 20 and 23 and 24 pounds out in a week. I don't know where this comes from. Now, I can answer your question if you're asking me, why do these guys do it? Well, they sign a contract. They have a weight class. It's not as though they can just show up on the day of and it's an all-comers event. So whatever they said they're going to make, they must make the agreed upon weight. But I like what you're saying. If you're closer to 170 pounds than you are 155 pounds, go 170 pounds. I agree with you that you should go whatever weight class you're closest to. Now, there's an argument there that bodies are different and some guys are carrying some fat. I'm doing a little bit of a broad stroke here. But the athletes that you're mentioning, they look good. They look lean. They don't look like they have a lot of fat on the bone. So now you're talking about dehydrating and pulling that all out of your body just to stick it back in, and your opponent's going to do the same thing. You're both going to get in there and weigh in 170 pounds, even though the agreed upon weight was 155. I agree with you. It gets a little bit weird. And I don't know that you should ever pass up a weight class. If you weigh 190 pounds and the closest weight is 185, okay. But to pass up 185 to get down to 170 seems weird. It seems weird to me. In many ways, it seems cowardly. What, are you scared to fight guys that weigh what you weigh? I'm with you. I'd like an explanation.
Hey, Chael, this is Mike, and my question is, what is going to be the next fight for Anthony Smith, and what is going to be the next fight for Tyrone Woodley? And please don't call me an idiot. Thank you.
All right, stupid. I mean, my dear friend. I'm kidding. Okay, look, I would like to know with Anthony Smith as well. I thought that there was some real wind blowing in the direction of Anthony Smith versus Corey Anderson. I thought there was some major momentum on that, but then all of us, there was even a little something on Twitter, but then that changed and it looks as though Corey Anderson is going to go in and fight Jan. So back to your question, who's up for Anthony Smith? And if you go look at the calendar, I believe it's in April. I'm close if I'm wrong, but I believe it's in April. The UFC is going to Omaha. Anthony Smith's got to be on that card. He's even got to be in the main event of that card, I'm assuming. So against who? And you got to have a rough guy. I mean, you got to have a name opponent, particularly if you're going to put him in the main event. But anybody that's got the balls to step in there with Lionheart, I mean, it requires a tough guy. That's very heavy lifting right there. So 205 is in such a weird mess right now. I mean, you could end up, Weidman could go in there. You could grab Jacare. I mean, you could put guys like this. Don't forget, if Smith's last fight, no, he's coming off a win. I'm going all the way back to John Jones. I was going to say he was coming off a loss to Jones. I'm forgetting about the Gustafsson fight, aren't I? So he's likely to have a guy with a win. You know what would hurt my feelings? And I realize the win-loss don't go hand in hand, but I'm answering this question live and on the fly right now. I don't hate the idea of him fighting Johnny Walker. I realize that Walker just lost to Anderson, but Walker does carry a good stigma around him. He'd like to get back in there. I liked the Corey Anderson fight, personally. But I'm reading that Corey's going in another direction. Now, you asked me about Tyron Woodley. And any time in this business where there's smoke, there's fire every single time. Nobody can keep a secret. And it seems as though T. Wood is going against Leon. But it has seemed that way for close to 30 days now. And I don't see that one done. So I don't know what would hold that up. They both want to fight each other. Now you're talking about just a piece of paper and getting it into a fax machine. Something seems to be stopping that match. If you want my best guess, I think we're going to see Leon. I think we're going to see Tyron.
What's up, Chael? My question today is about a dark horse contender. Now, recently, Jared Cannonier has become the dark horse of the middleweight division, with Israel Adesanya even saying that he is the second most dangerous guy that no one saw coming. So, my question is, what other dark horse contenders are there in the UFC right now? Let me know. Okay, great.
Cannonier is a dark horse, and Cannonier's done some heavy lifting. He's also got a great story. I mean, he started at heavyweight. A lot of people don't know that. Came down to light heavyweight, goes all the way down to middleweight. Now he's on a run with a win, including over Anderson Silva. Make sure you understand, if Israel Adesanya opens his mouth, make sure you close yours and listen, because he's never not working. Now, it is a true story that Cannonier saw Adesanya at an event, that everybody's looking to attack Adesanya, but Cannonier came up and was cool. It was like, man, you've been doing a great job, and I like watching you fight. That meant something to Adesanya. That's true. That's a true story. The other side of the coin, Adesanya's never not planning his next payday. Adesanya, before he got out of the ring with Whitaker, called out his next opponent in front of the world, in Paulo Costa. Adesanya is always a step ahead. The second Paulo Costa gets hurt, boom, Adesanya starts in on Yoel Romero. Starts bringing up messages and old things he'd said to coaches and going to Dana and going to social media. He's always working. He also understands that if he was to fight Jared Cannonier today, no one wants to see the fight. Cannonier is one of these guys. He's a good-looking guy. He's got a great record. He's got a good skill set. He's got a good backstory that for some reason people just don't know about. They just don't. If they knew he was at heavyweight, if they knew his personal life, if they knew what he went through to get down to 205 and now 185 pounds, Cannonier would catch on, but for some reason that story has just not resonated and hasn't been told. So Adesanya, who got a compliment from Cannonier, and it meant something to him. He wanted to be a nice guy back, but he's also he's pulling him up. He's pulling him up, so if and when that fight gets announced, people know who in the hell he's standing across from. I think that Cannonier is a dark horse. I don't agree with you in the least. I also don't want you to miss the message. Adesanya is a step ahead right now on everything. It's not just his skills. Adesanya is good at the sport. He's very, very skilled at the business.
Hey, Chael. Big fan from Australia here. My name's Jordan. Got one kind of question and another question. So, first part. Danaher's Death Squad, specifically Gordon Ryan, absolutely killing it, considered the GOAT. What are your thoughts on him transitioning to MMA, which I know he does plan on doing? How do you think that's going to work out? How do you think his application of jiu-jitsu is going to go down in there? Also, Colby versus Usman. I love Usman, hate Colby. Honestly though, I want to see Colby win. I want to see Colby win because after that, the next logical step in my eyes is Masvidal.
All right, so let's start with Gordon Ryan, and you probably think he's coming over to MMA because he says he's coming over to MMA. I'm not so sure about that, and you want to know why? He doesn't need to. The guys that start with grappling and then want to come into MMA, a lot of that is a cash grab and a lot of that is for attention. That's something that MMA can offer that grappling can't, except for one guy, Gordon. Gordon makes great money, not only with instructionals, but he's busy constantly. Gordon's got somebody he's got to go stretch out at least once a week. There's some weekends he's doing a match on a Friday, catches an airplane, does another match on a Sunday. Gordon is this one guy that not only can do well in grappling, he can do really well in grappling. So I don't know that he ever needs to leave that. It seems like he's the king of the mountain, and I don't see any reason for him to give that up. I don't know that he can get more allure and more attention. I don't know. I think staying with grappling is something that he should consider. And most guys, it is a transition phase, but he's unique. So let's see what happens with Gordon Ryan. As far as the title fight at 170, it's really tough to call. I mean, I think we can all at least agree we're down to the right two guys. I had Ali Abdelaziz on the show last week who reps. He's the manager of Kamaru Usman. And even he said, look, Colby's tougher than hell. That's a really hard night out. We think we can beat him. We're trained to beat him. We're prepared to beat him. but we're not taking anything for granted. Well, that's a very fair way to say it. These guys can beat each other. Colby could definitely beat Kamaru. Kamaru could beat Colby. I mean, this is a close fight. We've got the right two guys. There's a reason they both have 12-pound gold belts. Now they got to go out and figure it out. And I do think that the Jorge Masvidal next play is going to be very interesting. There's no way to look at the rankings and say he doesn't qualify for a world title fight. It would be interesting if that's the card he chooses to play. It would seem a lot of the other dance partners are busy. If Leon Edwards versus Tyron Woodley, if that rumor turns out to be true, you just took two players off the board. Meanwhile, you got Masvidal floating around out there, who's also a champion and also a top contender. Would seem he could slide right in, particularly if it was Colby, because of that backstory and current teammates and former roommates and all the heat that they have with each other. It would seem as though you could do that. But the Nick Diaz situation seems to be looming as well. Why is Conor McGregor at 170 pounds? Are we supposed to draw anything from that? Other than he's just looking to fight Cowboy and that's the weight class. I mean, there's a lot going on there. As far as the breakdown of Colby and Kamaru, I must tell you, as good as I knew both of those guys were, and both of them were champions, I did not know until their last fight just how good they were. I did not know Kamaru Usman was that good in wrestling, and I knew he was a good wrestler. I did not know Colby Covington until he went out and stood for 5 rounds with Robbie Lawler was that good in kickboxing, and I knew he was a good kickboxer. I didn't know he was that good. So if both guys put another gap and another leap and another gain into this performance in between their previous performances, it's a very, very tough fight to predict.
Uncle Chael, it's Mustafa from Chicago, city serving the best pizza in the country since the beginning of time. I would like to know about Francis Ngannou. Who do you think is the best opponent for him next, since Stipe is waiting for DC or DC is waiting for Stipe? I just feel bad for the guy. He's such a nice dude and he needs a good fight ASAP.
So Francis is in an interesting spot because he has cleaned out the division, right? I mean, I think that's represented. When you beat over him, you beat Cain Velasquez. In many ways, you've cleaned out the division. Now, to say that he could go in and fight a Daniel Cormier, that card is just not on the table anywhere. I believe we should take Daniel at his word when he says his next fight is his last fight. I believe him, very much so. Now, let's say Daniel doesn't win the fight. Stipe wins the fight. Stipe stays the champion. Ngannou is a top contender, but that fight has already happened. They're looking for parity. I'm well aware that rematches in this sport take place all the time, and I'm well aware sooner or later Stipe and Francis are going to need to rematch. I got that. The question is, does Francis sit? We don't know when the trilogy, Stipe Cormier 3, is going to happen. We don't know. Now, we're hearing fights that are announced as far out as April. By example, Tony versus Khabib is in April. So should we believe that the heavyweight championship is going to be contested prior? Are we to believe that the announcement of that fight date is going to come out and then be sooner than fight days we've already get? No, I don't think so. So let's just say that fight's in May. Francis is on his ass all the way till May. Oh, and then by the way, see what happens. Oh, and then by the way, recovery, training camp, rollout, media tour. No, Francis needs something to do between then. I'm not as bearish on the idea of Tyson Fury coming over to MMA as many people. I realize that it is largely believed that that is something used for hype. Tyson Fury doesn't need hype. He's the champion of the world. Vince is allowing him on WWE Pro. I mean, this guy can get a microphone anytime he wants. I just don't think he needs a publicity stunt. And if he was to come over and didn't really want to be, in a James Toney type situation against a all-American wrestler like Randy Couture. I mean, if you wanted to give him a really good and really interesting matchup where you weren't just feeding him to some grappling, Francis Ngannou makes a lot of sense. And I realize, man, I'm 100 to 1, maybe more like 20 to 1 that actually comes around. But it's not an impossibility. And if Tyson is coming over, that's the match to make.
Greetings, Mr. Sonnen. Chris here from South Florida. I'd like to define a word for you, then ask you 2 questions. The word is champion. Definition goes as follows: a person who has defeated or surpassed all rivals in a competition, especially a sport. Rivals being plural, meaning multiple people. My question goes as follows: multiple times I have heard you call Jorge Masvidal a champion, even a world champion. So my question is, what is he a world champion of? My second question would be, does it undermine the other champions, world champions in the UFC when we call Jorge Masvidal a world champion? Thank you for taking the time to answer these questions. Please, quick disclaimer, in no way am I trying to be condescending, disrespectful, or an asshole to you, Mr. Sonnen. I have a great deal of admiration and respect towards you, and I appreciate you greatly for answering these questions. So if it does come off as me being an asshole, please do not take it that way. Again, thank you for your time, Mr. Sonnen.
All right, I got to tell you, I don't believe I've ever called Jorge Masvidal a world champion, and if I have, I misspoke. I really don't think that I said that, but I do believe him to be a champion. I was there the night a championship was contested. I watched them put the belt around him. I heard the announcement made. It was a sanctioned fight. The New York State Athletic Commission was there. They had to make championship weight for the fight. They didn't get away in at 171 pounds. They had to make championship weight. There was a title on the line. Any way you want to do it. It was not a world championship. If I ever called him a world champion, that I would have to take back. Because to your point, yes, you can't just be throwing around championships, particularly ones that don't have a lineage with them. But as you know, if you're a fan of the show, and it sounds as though you are, I am a big advocate to bring back the super fight. People have a huge problem with the interim title. I don't. I like it because I think it creates opportunity. I like it because I know from being one of the guys in the back, morale can move forward when the undisputed champion is out for whatever reason. Hurt, faking hurt, being a crybaby, whatever it is, it moves forward. I just don't like the interim title when we don't know exactly what that means. By example, if you're the interim champion, I believe you then have the right. You are also the number one contender. That is what I believed to be true, and then we saw it not be true. Once with the Tony Ferguson situation, once with the Colby Covington situation. By example. So once that got revealed to us that an interim championship is not even as good as a number one contendership, I said, you know what? Bring back the super fight. Instead of doing the super fight for one night only, they came up with the BMF. So I do stand by the fact that Jorge Masvidal is a champion. I watched him make championship weight in a very hard fight, of which was contested for 5 rounds, of which he won, which was culminated with a belt. That's a champion. If I said world champion, I misspoke.
Hey, Chael. My question is, in this next fight with Conor McGregor versus Cowboy, how do you see Conor McGregor approaching this fight with his mental warfare? Do you see him doing what he normally does to his opponents, trash talking them to death, trying to get in their heads, or do you see him approaching this fight with Cowboy as more, in a more humble way, just because he needs the focus on getting a win, because it could backfire real bad for him if he talks a big game and ends up losing to Cowboy, which his chances to losing to Cowboy are pretty high, even though his chances of winning are also pretty high. Let me know what you think. Thanks.
Look, Conor is an entertainer to the highest of levels, but I have seen Conor go in and out. I have seen him just be straight up mean, the way that he was with Jose Aldo, by example. I've seen him just go out there and be silly, like he was with Eddie Alvarez, by example. I've seen him be irritated, like he was with Floyd Mayweather, by example. But Conor can go in and out of the way that he entertains. He doesn't just have to be mean, and he doesn't have to just trash talk. I saw him one of the greatest Conor McGregor lines of all time, and nobody heard it. This went under everybody's radar except for mine. He was getting ready to fight Dustin Poirier, and he was just doing like a little side interview with somebody from Fox. And he was speaking very calmly. He was very calm. He wasn't worked up at all. And he said, I really like Dustin. He's a nice little hillbilly from a circus town. And he moved right on to whatever else he was saying. I hit pause and I rewound it. I watched it again, and Conor, in a very polite in a tone of where he was trying to say something nice, where he was trying to show sportsmanship. Called him a nice little hillbilly from a circus town. Okay. That's funny. That's funny because it's not mean. It's not mean at all. It's also not even accurate. It's not true. It's great. It was wonderful, but it also shows that the entertainer of Conor McGregor doesn't have to have piss and vinegar. And if you come at Cowboy Cerrone with piss and vinegar, that's just not going to work. There's a lot of guys that will work with. Donald Cerrone almost died while scuba diving underwater in a cave. He's just not going to be scared by a few words. He's just not. He jumps out of airplanes. He's just not. He's not the guy. Donald Cerrone is nobody's fool. He's been in every fight you can think of. Championship fights, main event fight, co-main event fight, undercard fight, this organization, that organization, 5-round, 3-round, 2-round. He's done it all. He's just, there's no point. So if you are looking for mental warfare, of which I think Conor is, I think he will need a little bit of a different approach. Also, if he wants to get a reaction and be taken serious by the audience, of which he is a master of predicting and knowing what they want and giving them what they want, I don't think that an angry approach is the one that he'll use with Cowboy. But I will tell you, much like you, I look forward to finding out.
Biggest arms in West Lynn, Chael Sonnen. You either take it as a lesson or a blessing, and I want to thank you. I took it as a lesson and a blessing for your advice to never ride a motorcycle without a helmet again. Yes, I'm back, and I'm just curious on what is the biggest fight the UFC can make out of Jon Jones versus Rumble Johnson, Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou, or Francis Ngannou versus Rumble Johnson. Your thoughts?
Oh, the biggest fight. Okay, well, I got to throw Jon Jones in the equation because you're talking about a big fight. Jon would be bringing a world championship with him. I think a more compelling fight is if Jon Jones was to go up to heavyweight and take on Francis Ngannou just because of that size difference. I realize that vacates a belt. I think if you want to have some fun, the answer is Rumble Johnson versus Francis. And as I understand it, Rumble's already said he'd do that. Francis is looking for something to do. But I must tell you, when you bring up Rumble, he's told us he's coming back at heavyweight. So I guess we have to accept that. But we were promised at one point Rumble Johnson versus Jon Jones. So I like the equation that you have there. I like the three guys you have. I believe Jon is going to stay put at light heavyweight. In Jon's defense, even though this champ thing is a very real phenomenon going around, in Jon's defense, he's the right size light heavyweight. He just is. 217, 218 is what he walks around at. He's pretty lean. He pulls some weight. He's just the right size. Too big to be an 85-pounder. Too small to be a heavyweight, at least in theory. So I think if anybody wants in that Jon Jones equation, they're going to have to come down. Rumble would be the only one that could do that. But Rumble versus Ngannou, for some reason, seems a little more likely and possible than many people are giving it credit for.
Hey, Chael. The talks of GSP coming back for a mega fight or legacy fight seem to be ramping up a lot lately, and the names we keep hearing as potential opponents are Khabib, Conor, Masvidal, and now one of the Diaz brothers. However, there's one mega fight scenario that I don't think I've heard anybody discuss that I'd be interested to get your take on. What about GSP versus Mayweather in 2020? Could that be a legacy fight worth coming back for, in your opinion? And secondly, would it even make sense for either one of the fighters? Thanks.
Well, I'll tell you right out of the gate, that fight is not going to happen. For many reasons, they're just not going to put that fight together. If you want to have some fun, you and I down here, I like that match for many reasons. One, the walkout would be fun. Two, you've got to understand, Floyd is a very small guy. Now, he was very demanding even that Conor McGregor come all the way down to 153 pounds. And when Floyd got on the scale, he was greatly under his own weight class that he set. I want to say Floyd was like 148 pounds, but still had some trunks on when he did that. So Floyd did get very much into size. Even though, I mean, can you imagine that? Floyd is 50-0, 6-time world champion versus an amateur who'd never done it before and would not do it, even for $100 million, unless the scale said 153 or 53 or below. So we do have to give respect to the fact that there's a couple of things Floyd cares about. Size is one of them, and I just don't know that George can get that small. I just don't know that George could get that small. And I know he said he could come down to 155, so what's the difference if it's 153? But who knows what weight Floyd would put on that? He going to put 140? Floyd would be in the driver's seat on that. As far as the actual matchup, I mean, George has been boxing a long time with Freddie Roach at the wild card, sparring lots of rounds with Manny Pacquiao. Pacquiao invited him back. Pacquiao liked sparring with him. Pacquiao respected him. So it would be kind of interesting to see how that went. Roach has coached against Floyd before. Roach knows Floyd. Look, I'm stretching a little bit, and that fight is never going to happen. But if, and I think that's what you asked, if, I think that we could have some real compelling storylines there. And I think you could have some real compellingness, particularly if you go back and look at how well Conor did against Floyd. And Conor made it a street fight. And Floyd hadn't been in a street fight before. George is not necessarily that street fighter. He's usually more savvy and smarter than his opponents. So I think you could have some real fun when that broke down. And if that ever did happen, I think it'd be a lot more competitive. I just don't know that that's the fight that would demand and sell. Floyd likes to sell and draw in a certain way. And he needs a certain kind of opponent. And George, frankly, is too much of a gentleman for the boxing business.